fought my fires from burning our every day. You and me are nothing but temporary. Don't you stop begging for mercy. For when I win, I'm going to give, and I shall win. Yes, I shall win. Yes, I shall win. One-sided game. One, two. G, 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 G. And in the darkest moments, I will never feel lonely. 'Cause when nightmares arrive, I have you by my side. I have you by my side. You are my life. Everything is yours with me.
presents a rather interesting, amusing challenge to utilitarianism. It's a short paper, easy to read. I recommend checking it out, but I'm just going to discuss it here and discuss some of its implications. So let's say that you are an act utilitarian. You believe that the right action is whichever action maximizes happiness and minimizes suffering. The right action is whichever produces the greatest happiness for the greatest number, as Jeremy Bentham put it. Then you are approached by a mugger. The mugger is a deontologist, and they believe that it is morally wrong, always morally wrong, to break promises. And they always act on this belief, so they never break their promises. The mugger says to you, if you don't give me £10, then I will cut off my finger. So the mugger has made a promise. If she doesn't receive £10 from you, she's going to cut off her own finger. And since she never breaks her promises, you know that she will go through with it. So you have a choice to pay the mugger and she keeps her finger, or don't pay the mugger and she loses her finger. So here's the situation, right? Shown in this diagram. So there's you at the first node. You have the choice between giving the mugger £10 or not. If you choose to give the mugger the money, you're down £10. She's up £10. On the other hand, if you choose not to give the mugger the money, then she has the choice of either cutting off her finger or not cutting off her finger. But the thick line here shows that she will cut off her finger because she never breaks her promises. So really we can just ignore this third row. The third row isn't going to happen. So the problem is, it seems obvious that there is more utility in the mugger keeping her finger than in you keeping your £10. So the action that maximises utility is giving the mugger the £10. So if you are an act utilitarian, that's what you should do. You should give the mugger £10. The question is, how should the utilitarian deal with this situation? Certainly, it seems rather odd to say that you ought to give the mugger £10. But what will the utilitarian say about this? Well, look, you might say, okay, but obviously, it's stupid to cut off your finger just because somebody hasn't given you £10. Indeed, you ought not to cut off your finger. The mugger ought not to follow through on her promise. And if she does follow through on her promise, the responsibility is on her, not on me. It's not my problem if the mugger chooses to do something stupid. Well, look, fair enough. Obviously fair enough. We can probably all agree that the mugger ought not to have made the promise, and we can agree that the mugger ought not to act on the promise, given that she's made it. But the issue is that if you are an act utilitarian, it doesn't matter why people perform the actions that they do. All that matters is what they actually do. All that matters is the consequences. As an act utilitarian, in order to figure out what to do, you consider the various actions available to you, you consider the expected consequences of those actions, and you choose the action that is likely to have the greatest utility. That's it. That's all you're able to consider. What matters then is that the mugger will cut off her finger if you don't pay up. Whether or not the mugger should cut off her finger is just immaterial. Your choice is give £10 and the mugger loses her finger, or give £10 to the mugger and the mugger keeps her finger. And clearly the second choice is better. The second choice has greater utility overall. So that's what you should do if you're an utilitarian. Okay, another immediate objection is that giving £10 to the mugger would set a bad precedent. Now, as a utilitarian, you have to consider all of the consequences, not just the immediate consequences. So, yeah, sure, if the mugger keeps her finger, that's better in the immediate term, but the problem is that by giving up £10, you would encourage this kind of mugging, and that would make the world worse. It would be better if people didn't regularly make these kinds of deals. You don't want utilitarians to be, getting exploited by these deontological muggers, right? You don't want to set a bad precedent, so that's why you shouldn't pay up. Unfortunately, the mugger promises to you that this transaction is going to be secret. And since the mugger never breaks her promises, you can trust her when she says this. The mugger also promises you that she's never going to try this again. Right? Once she's gotten the £10 from you, that's it. She's never going to try to mug another utilitarian. So nothing that happens here is going to have any influence on anybody else. Yeah, the mugger always keeps her promises, so you can be assured that there's going to be no further negative consequences in the future. So unfortunately, you really do just face a choice between keeping the £10 and the mugger losing her finger, or paying up the £10 and her keeping her finger. And again, the second one seems to have greater utility. Alright then, another immediate response is to say, well, why should I trust the mugger? Okay, yeah, this mugger has promised to cut off her finger, but in the real world, there's no good reason to believe that she would. It's very unlikely that anybody would fulfill this kind of promise. So, based on my previous experiences of dealing with human beings, I mean, look, I know that people very often lie, whereas people don't cut off their fingers just because they haven't been given a little bit of money. So you shouldn't expect that failing to pay up would result in the mugger losing her finger, and that means you shouldn't pay up. Now, obviously, the problem with this response is, well, look, we can just stipulate for the purposes of the thought experiment that the mugger is indeed trustworthy. And if you need us to elaborate on that, we can do. I mean, maybe you actually have good evidence that the mugger will keep this promise. So let's just imagine that this interaction has already happened. Last week, you were approached by the mugger. She threatened to cut off her finger, one of her fingers, if you didn't pay her £10. And because you didn't trust her, you didn't pay up. But then she went ahead and cut off her finger. She kept her promise. So actually, you have very good reason to believe that she's going to keep the promise this time. Here's another potential response. You might simply deny that giving the £10 to the mugger will have the best outcome. After all, you are a utilitarian. So you're not going to keep the £10 for yourself. Obviously not. No utilitarian would do that. No, you're going to give the £10 to charity, and you're going to give it to an effective charity. So the options here are that a charity does not receive the £10 and the mugger keeps her finger, or a charity receives the £10 and the mugger loses her finger. Those are the real options. Now, losing a finger is bad, obviously, but let's say this charity is providing malaria nets. The average price of a malaria net is less than £2, so that's £10. That could buy 5 malaria nets. That might save 5 people from malaria. It might well save a life. So, better to give the £10 to the charity and possibly save a life than have the mugger lose, and have the mugger lose a finger, right? And I mean, after all, it seems pretty clear that the mugger isn't a particularly good person by your utilitarian standards. There's no reason to expect that the mugger would be doing anything good with the money. I mean, if the mugger were going to do something good with the money, she wouldn't need to promise to cut off her finger. She could just point out that she will use the money in a way that's going to bring about the best consequences, and then you as a utilitarian would be happy to part with the money. No, the reason why she's promising to cut off her finger is presumably because she's not going to use the money in a way that will bring about the best consequences. So look, her losing a finger, it's not a big deal in comparison to the life you can save with this £10 going to charity. Alright, the problem with this response is that we can, of course, simply change the payoff matrix. Okay, maybe the mugger promises to kill herself if she doesn't receive the £10. At that point, you're weighing up, definitely saving the mugger's life versus potentially saving other lives. Or there could be a whole group of muggers. Maybe there are 10 muggers who all promise to kill themselves if you don't hand over £10. Okay, so now it really does look like giving up the £10 is going to promote utility. We can fix the payouts so that handing over the money clearly maximises the utility. Alright then, another option for the utilitarian is simply to bite the bullet. Given what has been stipulated in the scenario, you really should just hand the money over to the mugger. And yeah, maybe this is a bit counterintuitive, but look, utilitarianism, like every moral theory, has some counterintuitive consequences. We already knew that. If you're a utilitarian, you're probably required to give a whole lot of your wealth to charity, maybe even over 90%. Like if you're reasonably well off, you're required to give over 90% of your income to charity. You ought to use your money to alleviate poverty rather than purchase luxury goods for yourself. Clearly, spending £10 to buy malaria nets will promote utility more than spending £10 on a new book. Look, many people find this very counterintuitive. Many people would be much more troubled by the idea that they have to give up over 90% of their wealth than by the idea that there might be some very specific scenarios where they have to hand over £10 to the mugger. But utilitarians will wholeheartedly embrace the counterintuitive claim that you ought to give up 90% of your wealth to charity. Okay, look, it's counterintuitive, but so be it. You should pay the mugger. Obviously there are issues with the mugging scenario that don't come up in these other cases. Maybe what's problematic about Bentham's mugging is not simply that it's counterintuitive. Maybe what's problematic is more that the mugger seems to have found a way to kind of hack the utilitarian calculus to their own benefit. In some sense, you do make the world better off by giving the mugger £10, but that's only because the mugger herself has explicitly set things up to ensure this outcome. She's kind of, exploiting you, and she's using your utilitarianism to do it. Look, you can also point out this is a very unusual scenario. It would probably never happen in the real world. If you actually encountered one of these muggers, you probably wouldn't have sufficient evidence to trust them. We might think it's not really such a problem if moral theories generate counterintuitive consequences in scenarios where people are stipulated to act in unrealistic ways, or where we have very unusual evidence or whatever. We do want our moral theory to cover not just actual, but also possible situations, but we might not put so much weight on the more outlandish situations that we are unlikely ever to encounter. Maybe we can discount counterintuitive consequences in scenarios like this. Yes, this is counterintuitive, yes, we're kind of biting the bullet and saying that you should pay the mugger, but because it's such an unusual situation, maybe that's not such a big deal. Those were some possible responses to the mugging scenario. Another option, of course, is to modify...
Wait, this guy doesn't have weakness. Why did I bother using exploit weakness?
I'm such an utilitarian, for instance. Gustafsson does present other mugging scenarios that are designed to swindle rule utilitarians and other types of utilitarians out of their money as well. So check out the article for those. But you can also check out my Patreon. If you like my channel, throw me some money, throw me some cash. It probably won't maximize utility, but it does help to keep this channel running, so maybe it will help keep the videos coming, and presumably you enjoy that. Anyway, on Patreon I will be uploading bonus videos about once a week. You can also donate on PayPal. I offer private tutoring in philosophy. Email if you're interested, and you can join the Discord. The link for that will be in the description. Let's get back to Bentham's mugging. Now the question is Bentham's mugging an argument against utilitarianism? Well, maybe not. Maybe not. Maybe it's only an argument against revealing that you are a utilitarian. Bentham's mugging is one case among many, actually, which shows that in a certain sense utilitarianism is self-defeating, but it's self-defeating in a way that is benign. Derek Parfit in chapter 1 of Reasons and Persons has an interesting discussion of self-defeating theories that I'll be appealing to here. So it's long been noticed that if utilitarianism is true, then it might well be the case that the truth of utilitarianism ought to be kept hidden. It might well be the case, if utilitarianism is true, that we shouldn't believe it. So following Parfit, we'll say that a theory T is self-defeating, just in case if several people try to achieve their T-given aims, these aims will be worse achieved. So it might well be that if people attempt to achieve utilitarian goals, these goals will be worse achieved than if they acted in accordance with some other theory. So utilitarianism tells us to act in such a way as to produce the greatest happiness for the greatest number. Let's suppose that everybody were to accept utilitarianism and were to attempt to fulfill this aim. Paradoxically, this might actually reduce happiness relative to other theories that they could act in accordance with. So here's one way this might happen. Much of our happiness comes from having close relationships with other people, where we give specific people special consideration. Like my family. I love my family, and because I love my family, I spend most of my time interacting with them. I have them in my thoughts much more than others. I mean, I will be much more inclined to do relatively small things to help my family than to, do things that could make a big difference to the lives of strangers. Now, if I was to aim to maximize the general happiness, then it looks like I'm going to have to suppress this special consideration that I have for my family. In fact, utilitarianism seems to directly require that, look, you have to treat all beings impartially. You can't spend that £10 buying a nice gift for your brother.
Wow.
You have to spend that £10 to, buy malaria nets for children in poverty, right? Like, that's what you have to do, because buying the malaria nets is what would maximize utility. So you have to treat everybody impartially. So I have to suppress the sort of special consideration I have for my family, the special relationship I have with them. If everybody tried to maximize general utility, they would all think and act impartially. But the problem is, this would cut them off from an important source of happiness. The happiness that comes from having close relationships. Now, look, you might say, well, okay, given the sort of degree of suffering and poverty in the world, maybe that would still be better. Maybe it would. But I think, we can certainly imagine a world that is much better than our world, where nobody is really in poverty, but, where, there are still problems, but if everybody were to act impartially, completely impartially in that world, it would end up reducing utility relative to continuing to have special close relationships with, say, family members. This is one way in which utilitarianism, by thinking and acting as a utilitarian, you might end up failing to maximize happiness. Maybe what will actually maximize happiness is not believing utilitarianism. Here's another way this could happen. People are not omniscient. In fact, people are very often irrational and they make all sorts of mistakes and so on. So many people are just going to be bad at calculating the costs and benefits of their actions. Maybe it would be better for people to follow certain simple, commonsensical rules of thumb than it would be for them to try to maximize utility in every given case. By trying to maximize utility, you end up causing great harm because you incorrectly calculate the costs and benefits of the action. As Henry Sidgwick once put it, Henry Sidgwick being a very famous utilitarian, he says, "A utilitarian may reasonably desire, on utilitarian principles, that some of his conclusions should be rejected by mankind generally, or even that the vulgar should keep aloof from his system as a whole. insofar as the inevitable indefiniteness and complexity of its calculations render it likely to lead to bad results in their hand. Now, regardless of whether you think this is the right analysis of the actual situation, there are clearly scenarios in which being a utilitarian would not maximize utility. Imagine an evil demon who announces that if you believe utilitarianism, it will destroy the entire world. Well, in that case, utilitarianism would instruct you not to believe utilitarianism. The right act is what maximizes utility, and in this situation, believing utilitarianism does not maximize utility. So, the situation is this. Utilitarianism tells us to maximize utility, but if we become utilitarians, this might fail to maximize utility. Thus, utilitarianism instructs us, at least in certain situations, not to become utilitarians. In a sense, then, utilitarianism is self-defeating, self-undermining. It's self-defeating in the sense that there are situations where utilitarianism instructs us not to believe utilitarianism. But is this a problem for the theory? Well, it doesn't seem like it is. I mean, it's not that utilitarianism entails that there is anything wrong with utilitarianism itself. It's not that the truth of utilitarianism entails the falsehood of utilitarianism. It's not self-defeating in that kind of way. It's just that utilitarianism entails that there are situations where you ought not to believe it. So, utilitarianism gives us a single moral aim.
Got him.
It says, maximize happiness. In itself, it does not give us the aim, believe utilitarianism. It doesn't even give us the aim, maximize true beliefs. Unless, of course, believing utilitarianism or maximizing true beliefs would be the most effective way of maximizing happiness. Utilitarianism instructs us to maximize happiness, which is to say, it instructs us to believe whatever moral theory would lead to maximizing happiness, and maybe believing utilitarianism would not maximize happiness. So there's nothing contradictory in the fact that utilitarianism instructs us sometimes not to believe it. So there's a sense in which it's self-defeating, but it seems to be benign. I think in the case of Bentham's mugging, we have a similar benign kind of self-defeat. Given the possibility of muggers exploiting the utilitarian calculus, given that it wouldn't be particularly good for everybody to have to hand over money to them, it seems that it would maximize utility not to announce that you are a utilitarian. I mean, a utilitarian can very easily avoid being mugged by simply keeping secret the fact that she's a utilitarian. So, in a world where these sorts of muggers are likely to be encountered, utilitarianism would probably instruct us not to announce that we are utilitarians. So, utilitarianism instructs us to maximize utility, but in a world where there are these utility muggers announcing that you are utilitarian would not maximize utility, because you'd end up getting mugged rather than sending the money to charity. So, utilitarianism instructs us not to announce that we are utilitarians. And again, I mean, this isn't really an objection to the theory, right? Utilitarianism has the aim, maximize happiness. It doesn't have the aim, tell everyone that you are a utilitarian. Tell everyone that you intend to maximize happiness. And again, Bentham's mugging is not unique in this respect. Suppose you meet an evil demon who tells you that if you ever reveal your utilitarian beliefs to anybody else, it will destroy the world. Well, pretty clearly, utilitarianism instructs you not to reveal your utilitarianism in that case. So the fact that utilitarianism is responsible to, the fact that utilitarianism is vulnerable to this kind of mugging is interesting, but to me, anyway, it doesn't seem to be any kind of objection to the theory. I said earlier that utilitarians might respond to Bentham's mugging by biting the bullet, but what I've said here is on the right lines, it's not really a bullet.
Using any elements to get the rare drop.
problem for utilitarianism.
Just kill it, not fight it permanently without ever dealing a single damage. That's
they're utilitarians, but nothing in utilitarianism as a theory in itself entails that you ought to tell everyone that you're a utilitarian. So, I don't think that mugging is really a problem, but it is interesting and it is amusing, and that is the end of that video. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
I kinda wanna reset everyone again. There are simply skills which I believe would be more beneficial for everyone here. Respecking would be a good idea. Oh, except for Tails, right? Oh, well, looks like I'll have to think about it later. Sige, I'll be there. I think next episode I'll reset everyone and go to normal difficulty and grind them all back to 80.